He wants Ukraine's resources, all minerals, profits from their sales, and a veto power to block other players from joining. Will Volodymyr Zelensky agree to such a deal? Does he have a choice? We'll discuss that tonight. Meanwhile, America's oldest ally has declared the breakup. Canada says the old relationship is over. We'll tell you why. Also tracking the next battleground, Greenland, with US Vice President J.D. Vance visiting. Putin is flexing his military muscle and talking about control of the Arctic. In the other war, in Israel, a new report is doing the rounds. Will they move Gazans to Indonesia? How Xi Jinping is trying to woo top global CEOs amid tariff threats. How Myanmar is faring after an earthquake measuring 7.7 on the Richter scale. The pictures are quite dramatic and the scale of the devastation unclear. In Pakistan, Balochistan is on the boil again. Why America's allies are rethinking their F-35 supplies after Trump referred to a kill switch. And what's the new drug that turns human blood into mosquito poison? All this and more lined up. The headlines first. Nepal's police clash with pro-monarchy demonstrators. At least 2 people have been killed in the violence. Thousands of people gathered in Kathmandu demanding the restoration of the monarchy. The police fired tear gas and water cannons to disperse the protesters. A curfew has now been imposed in the area. In 2008, the Himalayan nation had abolished the monarchy. Israel strikes Lebanon's capital Beirut for the first time since the November ceasefire, risking the fragile truce with Hezbollah. The Israeli army issued evacuation orders before the bombing. Earlier, Israel had said that it had intercepted 2 rockets fired from Lebanon. Iran-backed Hezbollah has denied any involvement. Turkey's president speaks with his Russian counterpart. Erdogan tells Putin their cooperation is crucial for resolving regional conflicts. The 2 leaders discussed security in the Black Sea during the phone call. Ankara has pledged to ensure the safety of commercial navigation. Erdogan and Putin also spoke about the situation in Syria. Chinese President Xi Jinping meets Bangladesh's interim leader Mohammad Yunus. Dhaka wants Beijing to reduce interest rates for Chinese loans. This is Yunus's first bilateral state visit since assuming office last August. Next week, he will attend the BIMSTEC summit in Bangkok, where he has sought a meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And gold hits a record high as investors seek the safe haven asset. This comes amid fears of a trade war after US President Trump's latest tariffs. Gold is usually seen as a hedge against economic and political uncertainty. Bullion has hit 17 record highs this year.
You don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. We were just pouring money into Ukraine. It was a very unfair situation. So we made a deal and it'll be signed very soon.
The US is mediating a peace deal for Ukraine, but they won't do it for free. They have named a new price for peace. Washington wants control of all of Ukraine's critical resources. They've sent a new draft deal to Kyiv. Top Ukrainian officials and international media have seen it, and they say it goes far beyond the previous agreement. Here's what the United States has demanded: complete control of Ukraine's natural resources, oil, gas, minerals, everything. The Americans want it. Now, this is far more aggressive than the original minerals deal. In the old deal, profits were supposed to be shared, but now the US wants all major energy assets of Ukraine, plus it wants to keep all the money generated from them. So obviously, senior Ukrainian officials have raised an alarm. They say this deal threatens their sovereignty, that their profits would be routed abroad, making Ukraine even more dependent on the US. Because along with this deal, America wants a veto power to decide which foreign investments can be made in Ukraine. Let me repeat that for you. The US wants to decide and veto foreign investments in Ukraine, including any proposals from Europe. This is one of the clauses in the new draft. It is called the right of first offer. And here's what it means. If there is a different deal on the table for Ukraine's natural resources, America can effectively kill it. It wants exclusive access. And this is in line with Trump's position on Europe. He often complains about Europe's role in the war. He says they're not doing enough and that the US has been shortchanged.
Europe is in for a very small fraction of what we're in for. It affects them much more than it affects us. Again, they are in as a loan, which nobody knew until I came along. Europe is giving the money to Ukraine as a loan. We were just pouring money into Ukraine. It was a very unfair situation. So we made a deal on rare earths.
Perhaps that is why the US president wants to not leave anything out. He also wants all revenues from Ukraine's mineral wealth. There is one more clause in the draft pact about a new reconstruction fund. Again, the US wants to control it. Profits from Ukrainian projects will go into this reconstruction fund, but Kyiv will not be able to use this money, at least not immediately. First, the Americans will be paid. They will recover the cost of their weapons and aid to Ukraine. Only then, only when they have got all their money, can Ukraine access the fund. Now, these are very strong terms. Will Ukraine agree to them? Will it sign this deal? Zelensky has not said yes or no. He says they're still negotiating. The US is constantly pushing for more changes. But I guess after the showdown at the White House, Zelensky is being more cautious, choosing his words carefully and saying that he wants to cooperate with the United States.
The conditions are constantly changing. I thought that we have agreed that there will be a framework deal and then the full deal. Now, as I understand, the Ukrainian and American teams are working on it because the US is changing these conditions and offers to sign the full deal right away. I wouldn't want the US to have impression that Ukraine is against the minerals deal in general. We have shown our positive signals. We are for cooperations with the US.
And what does Ukraine get in return? It may end up surrendering all its mineral wealth with no guarantee of peace or even American protection. The US has refused to secure Ukraine. It is giving zero security guarantees in return. Meanwhile, negotiations for a peace deal remain stalled. A few days back, the US negotiated a ceasefire in the Black Sea. The talks happened in Saudi Arabia. The Americans mediated between Ukraine and Russia and then declared that they had an agreement. But Russia has rejected that deal. President Putin, in fact, is raising the stakes. He says Zelensky should step aside. Putin wants Ukraine under temporary international administration. He wants a transitory government in Kyiv, one that paves the way for new elections in Ukraine and a new government in Ukraine that Moscow finds legitimate. Only then will the real peace talks begin. These are the words of Russian President Putin.
In principle, of course, it would be possible, under the auspices of the UN, with the United States, even with European countries, and of course with our partners and friends, to discuss the possibility of introducing temporary administration in Ukraine. For what? In order to hold democratic elections, in order to bring to power a viable government that enjoys the people's trust, and then begin negotiations with it on a peace treaty, sign legitimate documents that will be recognized throughout the world and will be reliable and stable.
Those are the terms of Putin. The US is still negotiating, but there's no real breakthrough. Meanwhile, on the ground, the fighting continues. Where does this leave Ukraine? Firmly on the back foot and with no good options. Every day there is a new demand, a new proposal and a new deal to discuss. And each new proposal is worse than the one before, demanding more and more from Kyiv, more resources, more control, and even political power. So the prospects for Ukraine are narrowing. The US wants economic control and Russia wants political dominance. And these two are discussing Kyiv's future, often with Kyiv not even in the room. The only thing that looks increasingly certain now is this: Kyiv will have to make some serious concessions for peace, either its mineral wealth or its political sovereignty, or maybe even both. It will have to pay a hefty price for peace.
The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over. It's my solemn promise that when President Trump threatens us again, we will fight back.
Let's shift our focus to North America, to two nations that have been through thick and thin, but now their relationship may never be the same again. I'm talking about the US and Canada, once the closest of allies, but not anymore, all thanks to US President Donald Trump. You know that the US President is imposing tariffs soon on almost everyone. D-Day is the 2nd of April, or as Trump calls it, Liberation Day. On Wednesday, Trump confirmed one of the many tariffs that he is imposing. He said he will be imposing 25% duties on cars and car parts. And he made no secret about who he is targeting.
But this is very exciting to me. This is the automobile industry, and this will continue to spur growth like you haven't seen. Before I was elected, we were losing all of our plants. They were being built in Mexico and Canada and other places.
Canada is livid. Their new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, took a while to respond to this move, but when he did so last night, it was especially grim. Listen to what he said.
Yesterday, in the latest salvo in his trade war, President Trump again imposed unjustified tariffs on our nation in violation of our existing trade agreements. And our response to these latest tariffs is to fight, is to protect, and to build. It's my solemn promise that when President Trump threatens us again, we will fight back. We will fight back with everything we have to get the best deal for Canada. We will build an independent future for our country stronger than ever. The old relationship we had with the United States, based on deepening integration of our economies and tight security and military cooperations, is over.
He says the old US-Canada relationship is over. That's quite the statement. You might even think it's uncalled for. After all, Trump says he just wants to move car plants back to the US. And he plans to do this by making foreign cars unaffordable. Here's how his tariffs will work. If a car is made in another country, US importers will have to pay 25% of the cost as tariff, just so they can sell it in the US. That is how tariffs work. They are a tax on American importers, and this additional cost will get passed on to the customer. Basically, Trump is making imported products costlier in the hope that this will force Americans to buy local. That's the tariff logic in a nutshell. And it seems like an attack on all foreign automobile firms, not just Canadian ones. The tariffs seem to be indiscriminate, but that's not the case. The car tariffs will hurt Canada a lot more than other nations. You see, the American and Canadian automobile industries are interconnected. There's barely anything like a purely American car anymore, or a purely Canadian one for that matter. Each car keeps crossing the border during manufacturing multiple times. And this is because of an old agreement. The Canada-United States Automotive Products Agreement from 1965. This deal allowed free movement of auto parts between the two countries. It encouraged them to integrate their car industries. It was a way for both countries to grow together, and things have been that way for about 60 years. But Trump's car tariffs will undo 6 decades of partnership. Canada's auto workers will come under attack from what was once its closest ally. That is why Canada is furious, and that is why Carney said the old relationship is over. He said part of it was based on deepening economic integration. But think about it today. Canada now knows that this integration is a weakness, one that can be exploited by the US. Whenever the next Trump-like president is elected, Ottawa may have never considered the possibility before, but it will now. The US elected Donald Trump not once but twice, which means they can elect a Trump clone in the future too. So the integrated economy will always be Canada's Achilles heel. Would you be willing to keep such vulnerability around? Of course not. You wouldn't want to develop it in the first place, but Canada was naive. They really did not believe the US would do this to them. They may have been partners forever, blood brothers, quite literally. I used the phrase D-Day earlier in the story. That is the day the Americans landed in Normandy during the Second World War. That's the day they officially entered the war in Europe. And guess who was with them, spilling blood side by side? It was the Canadians. That is why Ottawa never thought that this day would come. That's also why Carney said their tight security and military cooperation is over. Carney and Trump had a call today. But it probably won't change the Canadian leader's mind, because as far as he's concerned, after everything their countries have been through, Trump and the Americans have stabbed Canada in the back, and there is no way to recover from that. It's not just Canada. The US is waging war on other allies too, in Europe and NATO. This story is about Greenland. It's a semi-autonomous region that belongs to Denmark. Donald Trump wants to take it, and he's quite serious about it. But you already know this. We are talking about it again because Greenland has some unwelcome visitors today. US Vice President J.D. Vance, along with his wife and Second Lady Usha Vance. Earlier, she was supposed to go there alone, on her own. The Americans pitched it as a cultural tour where Usha Vance would attend local events. But now, Vice President J.D. Vance is tagging along, and this has dramatically changed the itinerary. It's now a one-day visit. They will be back home tonight. There will be no cultural events or exchanges, just a visit to a remote military base, a US Space Force outpost in Greenland. That's what J.D. Vance is visiting. With him are top officials from Washington, Mike Waltz, the US National Security Advisor, Chris Wright, the US Secretary for Energy, or the American Energy Minister, and Senator Mike Lee of the Republican Party. So this is a high-level delegation with a clear military overtone. Needless to say, the people of Greenland are not thrilled. They are protesting. So is the government of Denmark. The Danish foreign minister issued a statement. He said no government officials from Denmark would meet J.D. Vance. And here's what the Danish prime minister said.
Greenland belongs to the Greenlandic people, and Greenland is part of the Danish kingdom, and that is not going to change.
Like I said, Greenland is a semi-autonomous region. It is still part of the Danish kingdom, and that is why Denmark has lodged a strong protest. It insists that Greenland's status will not change. But Donald Trump does not care. He says the US needs Greenland.
How far are you prepared to go on Greenland? You said this morning that the United States needs Greenland.
We need Greenland for national security and international security. So I think we'll go as far as we have to go. We need Greenland, and the world needs us to have Greenland, including Denmark. Denmark has to have us have Greenland, and we'll see what happens. But if we don't have Greenland, we can't have great international security.
It started as a joke, then sounded like Trump's obsession, but now the plan to annex Greenland is part of US foreign policy. J.D. Vance's visit sends a loud and clear message. The US under Donald Trump is very serious about taking Greenland. And the Russians are watching this closely. President Vladimir Putin says it would be folly to think that Trump is not serious.
Everybody knows very well about the US plans to take over Greenland, though it can be surprising only at first sight. It's a huge mistake to think that it is just extravagant talk of the new US administration. Not even close. In fact, the US had such plans as far back as in 1860s. Even back then, the US administration thought about possibility of Greenland and Iceland annexation. But that idea was not supported by the US Congress.
He's talking about the past. When the US tried to purchase Greenland, he suggested that Washington will step up its campaign and use Greenland to project influence over the wider Arctic, which could be the next battleground, the Arctic. The Russians are deeply interested in this region for two reasons. The first is trade. It could open up new shipping routes. Global warming is melting ice in the Arctic. It is opening up shipping routes, connecting Europe, Russia, and North America, reducing travel time and saving cost. So Russia wants to secure its presence along those paths. It wants to control the Arctic sea lanes. That is reason number one. The second is Greenland's mineral wealth. It has rich and untapped reserves of oil and gas. The Americans want them, so do the Russians. which is why Putin wants to, quote-unquote, strengthen Russia's leadership in the Arctic. That's how he put it. He has launched a new submarine. It is called Perm. This is a nuclear-powered sub, heavily armed with hypersonic missiles that can travel faster than sound and are difficult to intercept. This sub is extremely suitable for operations in the Arctic. Putin also inspected other submarines this week, plus some icebreaker facilities. Clearly, he's responding to America's moves in the region. Trump's interest in Greenland has kicked off a storm. The Arctic is becoming increasingly militarized. Both the US and Russia are expanding their presence, and Greenland could be caught in the middle. Our next story is about the war in Gaza. A new report is doing the rounds. It's about the potential relocation of Palestinians. Apparently, 100 people from Gaza will be sent to Indonesia to work in the construction sector. And this is said to be a pilot program. If it is successful, more Gazans will be encouraged to go to Indonesia. I should add that they will reportedly be encouraged by Israel. But there's one issue with this new report. Indonesia says it is rubbish. So what's really going on here? Is Indonesia lying, or is there something else afoot? Our next story has the details.
Look at this headline. 100 Gazans to move to Indonesia as part of a pilot work program. Next to this is the word report. This Israeli outlet is covering its bases. Next, look at this. 100 Gazans to migrate to Indonesia for work under new plan. This outlet goes further to shield itself, squarely laying the blame on an Israeli news channel. Once the bases are covered, both reports go into the details. They say that there's a migration plan underway, a voluntary migration plan. An initial group of 100 Gazans is set to fly to Indonesia to work in the Southeast Asian nation's construction sector. This is apparently a pilot. If it's successful, thousands of Gazans will be encouraged to voluntarily move to Indonesia, and they may potentially decide to permanently resettle there. So according to the report, Indonesia is creating jobs for Gazans and willing to make space for them to permanently move there. And who's overseeing all of this in West Asia? It's not Hamas, the group that actually rules over the Gazans. It's not some charitable organization either. The person in charge of the pilot is apparently Major General Ghassan Alian, the head of an Israeli Defense Ministry body. If the pilot is successful, a new project will take shape, under a migration administration being established by Israel. This agency will reportedly head the project to relocate Gazans to Indonesia. Again, that is if that pilot is successful. The new project could be led by Brigadier General Ofer Winter, an officer that the Israeli media describes as controversial. All of this probably sounds dystopian. It raises a lot of questions. First, is something like this legal? According to international humanitarian law, this could constitute ethnic cleansing. If that's the case, then why is Indonesia agreeing to this? Well, reports say it hasn't. Jakarta says it has neither discussed the matter with any party nor heard related information. This isn't the first time Indonesia has had to offer such a clarification. Something similar happened in January, around the time US President Donald Trump was about to get sworn in. His envoy to West Asia, Steve Witkoff, was reportedly thinking about the same thing, sending Gazans to Indonesia. So it could be rebuilt into, as Trump put it, the Riviera of the Middle East. Indonesia was questioned about the relocation of Gazans back in January as well. It categorically rejected the idea back then, and it's rejecting the new reports as well. So why do these reports keep surfacing? One possibility is that Jakarta is lying, but that would be political suicide. Palestinians have widespread support in Indonesia, so any government aiding their displacement would risk getting kicked out. The other option is that Israel is spreading these stories, perhaps to normalize the idea or to create panic. Israel has resumed the fighting in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu says it's to pressure Hamas into releasing the remaining hostages. Talk of relocating Palestinians would definitely add to the pressure. Some Gazans have begun protesting against Hamas. If they fear being relocated, the protests could intensify. The other reason could be that the Netanyahu government is trying to drum up support. The resumption of the fighting in Gaza is contentious, to say the least. Israelis are protesting too. They feel it endangers the remaining hostages, so they are demonstrating against Netanyahu. Now look at this report again. It says a controversial officer could be in charge of the relocation project, and this officer is apparently loved by Israel's religious community. Could the report be Israel's way to placate the masses back home as well? There are a lot of reasons for Israel to create a buzz around the relocation plan, but there's only one thing we know for sure. The relocation of Palestinians will always be a red line, and crossing it is bound to lead to more bloodshed.
Myanmar is in the headlines again and again for the wrong reasons. This is a country in Southeast Asia torn apart by 4 years of civil war and now a massive earthquake. It has left the country devastated. The quake measured 7.7 on the Richter scale. The epicenter was in the northwest of the country, about 16 kilometers from the city of Sagaing. But tremors were felt across borders in Thailand and southwest China. 12 minutes after the quake, a second one came with a magnitude of 6.4. This time the epicenter was 18 kilometers south of Sagaing. And this was followed by aftershocks, at least 12 major ones spread across many hours and felt across the region.
I was sleeping in my bed, and at first I thought my head was spinning. I heard things falling down from upstairs like they were stones hitting down on us. I told my kids that we can't stay here, so we ran down to get down here. I'm still shaking.
The quake has left widespread destruction in its wake. According to residents in Myanmar, the damage is quote-unquote enormous. The country is ruled by a military junta. It has declared a state of emergency in 6 regions. Information about the death toll is limited because the military junta has repeatedly shut off the internet. But reports say at least 144 people have been killed and more than 730 have been injured. At least 20 people have been killed in just one city, the country's second largest city, Mandalay, which is home to about 1.5 million people. This death toll is expected to rise. Meanwhile, in Thailand, the pictures were quite dramatic. Thailand borders Myanmar to the east. The quake shook its capital, Bangkok, where an unfinished high-rise building collapsed. Take a look.
Wait! Shit! The whole building collapsed!
This was a 30-story building. It was reduced to rubble within seconds, killing at least 8 people and injuring dozens. It has also left at least 117 people missing. They are believed to be trapped under the rubble.
I was working at a building over here on the 2nd floor when the quake happened. I ran down the stairs and got outside, and that's when I looked up at this building as there was a loud bang. Dust particles were bursting out of it, and no later than 3 to 5 seconds, the whole building collapsed. Everyone was running for their lives. I was scared and I'm still shocked.
Both Myanmar and Thailand have ramped up rescue efforts. They're scrambling to cope with the aftermath. Meanwhile, offers of disaster relief are pouring in. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India stands ready to offer all possible assistance. A similar message has come from the European Union. Both Myanmar and Thailand need all the help they can get. A disaster of this scale poses major challenges. In Thailand, the collapse of buildings is the biggest issue. Remember, this is not a quake-prone country, so infrastructure here is not made to withstand such damage. And authorities must brave mountains of rubble to rescue the victims. But according to their Prime Minister, hours after the quake, the situation is starting to ease. In Myanmar, the story is quite different. This is one of the world's most seismically active regions. It is also one of Asia's poorest nations. Parts of the country are run by militias. There is major political turmoil, so infrastructure remains poor. Healthcare is equally bad. There is a severe shortage of food. So after 4 years of civil war, Myanmar finds itself devastated by an earthquake. The true scale of the damage still remains unclear. Our thoughts and prayers are with the people of Myanmar and Thailand. Let's talk about the darling of the international arms market, Lockheed Martin's F-35. It is stealthy, supersonic, capable of dogfighting and striking on-ground targets. F-35 is arguably the most sophisticated US weapon and the most sought-after jets. But it seems that this last bit is changing now. This month, nation after nation has voiced concerns about the F-35. Portugal wants to cancel its plans to purchase the fighter. Canada says that it will reconsider buying the plane, and so will Germany. Why is this happening? What does this mean for America's most expensive defense program, and what alternatives do countries have? Here's a report.
This is the F-35, a state-of-the-art fighter jet. Reportedly, the world's only advanced long-range stealth fighter. It's produced by Lockheed Martin, and it is America's most popular warplane. To give you an idea, about 18 years since the jet took its first flight, more than 1,000 F-35s are in operation in 20 countries. This includes the US, of course, which operates the jet, as well as 19 allied nations, including members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, like the UK, Italy, and Canada, as well as some non-NATO members, such as Japan. To put it simply, for years now, the F-35 has been the hot ticket item in the international arms market. That is, until now. There is growing unease over the stealth fighter. This month, one nation after another that had signed up for the F-35 has voiced concerns. Portugal wants to cancel plans to buy the plane. Canada says that it will reconsider the purchase. Germany is also reconsidering the jet deal. Why is this happening? Here's a clue. These qualms have little to do with the plane itself. Nothing has changed about its performance. This increasing international unease is about trust issues. Again, not with the plane, but with its commander-in-chief, US President Donald Trump. In recent weeks, Trump has unleashed economic and geopolitical uncertainty. He has threatened to withdraw military support to European members of NATO. He has suggested that he might not adhere to the Mutual Defense Pact of the Transatlantic Alliance. He has threatened to annex Greenland and Canada. He has imposed bruising tariffs. So now, US allies are openly expressing their doubts about the stealth fighter. They have two major concerns. First, the so-called kill switch. You see, the F-35 stealth is not just a physical airframe. The jet has superior hardware and software. It has a whole suite of networked systems, kind of like a smartphone. The jet needs software patches and data to work effectively. The stealth technology makes it difficult for enemies to track the aircraft. But this does not mean that the plane is invisible. To survive in modern warfare, it needs to constantly track and assess enemy radars. It needs regular system updates. It needs to store all kinds of information as data files. And do you know who does all this? The US. Irrespective of who flies the plane, every nation that uses the F-35 is dependent on the US to keep its planes functioning properly. Meaning, there needs to be an assumed level of trust in America if allies want to keep flying the plane. But recently, the changing geopolitical landscape has shaken this said trust. There have been rumors that there is a kill switch which could abruptly immobilize the F-35. After several weeks of speculation, on March 18th, the Pentagon formally denied that it has the ability to remotely disable the fighter jets, but that has done little to quell fears. Plus, it's not the only concern. The second big question mark is the vulnerability of the F-35, its over-reliance on the US, and America's ability to process critical mission data. So if things go south, there is a big risk here. Especially considering that Donald Trump is thinking about a future where America's allies are maybe not allies anymore.
Certain allies will be selling them, perhaps toned-down versions. We like to tone them down about 10%, which probably makes sense because someday maybe they're not our allies, right?
So what options do these maybe not allies have? There are no direct alternatives to the F-35. But there are some limited options, like the European Eurofighter Typhoon or France's Rafale, but neither of these aircraft are stealth. And that is a major disadvantage. So it seems that American allies are stuck between the devil and the deep blue sea.
Our next story is from Pakistan. The country has been rocked by a spate of attacks in the restive Balochistan region. The attacks have left at least 17 people dead and dozens injured. Quetta, Gwadar, Turbat and Mastoom. All these places saw attacks within a period of 24 hours, and this is just Balochistan. There were attacks in other parts of Pakistan as well. The country seems to be tearing at its seams, despite or perhaps because of their government's best efforts. Here's our report.
Back-to-back terror attacks have taken place in Balochistan. At least 4 separate attacks took place within a 24-hour time frame. There was a bomb blast in the regional capital, Quetta. 3 people were killed in the blast and at least 21 were injured, 4 of them critically so. The bomb was reportedly meant for a police van and it got its intended target. But it also claimed the lives of innocent bystanders. The attack has instilled fear in the people of Quetta.
मैं अपने वालिद साहब के शुगर के मेडिसिन लेने जा रहा हूँ मैं कल के दिन जाऊँगा तो खौफ से जाऊँगा ये कैसी ज़िंदगी ये कैसी खौफ ये क्यों इस तरह
आपको जैसे बेहतर पता है कि बस हम जैसे ही घर से निकलते उम्मीद तो नहीं होती कि हम वापस घर आएँ हालात तो आपके सामने हैं हालात के जज़ा ले चुके हैं कहीं भी हम सेफ नहीं है सर
Quetta wasn't the only city to suffer an attack. 6 people were killed in Gwadar. They were residents of Pakistan's Punjab province. They were on a bus headed to Karachi, but it was stopped by some gunmen. The 6 Punjabis were shot at the scene. 5 died instantly, while 1 succumbed to injuries while receiving treatment at a hospital. 3 other people from that bus were abducted by the gunmen, and the violence didn't stop there. An attack also took place in Turbat. A grenade was lobbed at a house and 5 members of a family were killed, a couple and 3 children. Then there was an attack in Mastung. 3 people were killed, including an officer from Pakistan's counter-terrorism department. 2 Punjabi people were also abducted during this attack in Mastung, and the town could have seen even more terror because explosives were found under a bridge. But thankfully, they were defused. All these attacks took place in Balochistan within just 24 hours. So what does this tell you? 1. Balochistan seems to be on the brink. 2. The attackers are targeting the Pakistani authorities. 3. They are also targeting Punjabi people in general. All these things add up when you consider the situation of Balochistan. This is the largest province of Pakistan, but it's also the most underdeveloped. Balochistan is rich in minerals, but they are being extracted by Chinese firms, and the locals feel both neglected and oppressed. Locals who raise their voices often disappear. Thousands have faced this fate, leading to widespread anger in the region against the powers that be who are sitting in Pakistan's Punjab. Add all these factors together and you have the perfect storm, which is why Balochistan saw such a bloody day yesterday. Pakistan's military and their pocket politicians in Islamabad tried to rule over Balochistan with an iron grip. The result is rage which manifests in terror in attacks like the one yesterday and the train hijacking earlier this month. These are the direct results of state policy. And this policy isn't exclusive to Balochistan either. There's also Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, where militants killed security personnel on Wednesday. And then Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, where locals are protesting. Almost every corner of Pakistan is revolting against the authorities. And this proves one thing. The people sitting in Rawalpindi and Islamabad don't have a clue. Their focus has been on attacking neighbours like India instead of improving the lives of their own citizens. That's why the citizens of Pakistan don't want to be under their control anymore.
Time for a Vantage exclusive. The global order is shifting. Western powers are facing upheaval. Donald Trump's unpredictable moves have added to the turmoil. Europe stands at a crossroads, and the rest of the world is thinking, how should we respond? Our guest tonight believes that India could offer some lessons. Dr. Kyung Wah Kang says the world is studying India's playbook. Until recently, she was South Korea's foreign minister, the first woman to hold the post. She now leads the Asia Society, which is a prominent think tank. Earlier today, I sat down with her. Dr. Kang praised India's strategic autonomy. She also addressed Trump's foreign policy. In her view, he is better prepared this time, and countries like South Korea must be ready for his moves, especially for a new wave of tariffs. Here's an excerpt from that conversation. Dr. Kang, welcome to First Post.
Thank you for having me.
You worked with the first Trump administration when you were in government, and now as somebody who's still tracking policy and moves from the outside very closely. What difference do you see in their approach? Is this a more determined, more focused administration? Is it a more...
President Trump during his first term was, yes, he was there, but you also had many traditionalist diplomats, securocrats who had their way of doing things vis-a-vis president's unconventional way of doing things, and the two combined to, I think, temper his excesses, if I may put it that way. This time he's come back fully prepared. He had think tanks preparing projects for him, for example, the Heritage Foundation's project to 2025. And so that's why from day one he's able to declare various kinds of executive orders. I think now we count nearly 100 or over 100, and bills introduced into the Congress. So clearly much more prepared, and also surrounded by much more loyalists around him than the previous administrations. Yes, he's very emboldened and very unrestrained in moving in the direction that he wants to.
Most capitals in the world are trying to gear up to respond to Trump's moves. What complicates the story, especially for South Korea, is the fact that you have an ongoing political crisis and an impeachment process. How does it impact your preparedness to respond?
Well, I think clearly it has had a huge negative impact. The country has been in limbo since the day the president declared martial law in early December. And this impeachment, the process has been so long. The Constitutional Court has been deliberating, and it's taking its time to come out with a decision. In the meanwhile, the country has been unable to move on. The economy was in a very difficult situation even prior to the martial law declaration, and in the middle of this lack of national leadership. So in the midst of this, the country seems to have lost sight of where is the economy, and we know, given the Trump tariff measures, you have to have a strategy. You have to have a way to deal with these tariffs coming our way, and currently, you really need that highest level of authority to go. To have that discussion with the highest authority in the United States and other countries to be able to respond as effectively as they could, and this is just not happening.
And the tariff deadline is approaching, April 2nd.
April 2nd, we'll see how that is. The declaration is. Will it be across the board, or will it be country by country? Will it be sector specific? So there's a lot of details that we won't know until that day comes.
You mentioned having a conversation with Minister Jaishankar, and in that conversation you also hailed India's policy of non-alignment and strategic autonomy. How do you see Prime Minister Modi's approach to foreign policy and the way he has shaped India's relationship with the world?
I think very admirable. I mean, the domestic leadership and all the reforms, and the minister being the face of advocating for India's national interests on the global stage has been one of the more capable performances as foreign minister that I could see. So India creating that space for an independent foreign policy stance. I think non-alignment is not the word used currently. The minister used multipolarity, I think is the word. But and that ability to create these new, capturing the fluidity in these conceptual terms, I think is a clear indication of India's, if I may put it, creativity, and with that creativity, creating this space, autonomous, strategic space for strategic autonomy and multipolarity. So yes, I think there lots of people are looking at India's playbook to see how we position ourselves in this changing global dynamics.
Dr. Kyung Wha Kang, thank you very much for this conversation and for sharing your insights.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. For our last story tonight, let's talk about some annoying blood-sucking creatures. I'm referring to mosquitoes. They seem to be everywhere, feeding on our blood, transmitting diseases and killing more than 600,000 people every year. But now scientists may have found just the way to fight them. They want to kill mosquitoes by poisoning them, apparently with human blood. So how will this work? Our next report tells you.
Mosquitoes are tiny creatures, but their impact can be huge, and not in a good way. Last year, the number of malaria cases reached 263 million the world over. In fact, since the year 2000, the world has witnessed about 2.2 billion malaria cases, which have killed 12.7 million people. And malaria is just one of the many deadly diseases that are transported by mosquitoes. For decades now, scientists have tried to fight mosquitoes. They have tried to eliminate stagnant water, introduce mosquito predators like fish into water bodies, or modified mosquitoes to reduce their population. Yet these annoying creatures continue to haunt us. So now, scientists have a new solution, which sounds a bit like science fiction. Here's what researchers say. They want to poison mosquitoes. With what, you ask? The very thing that these parasites crave, human blood. To give you the gist, scientists want to make our blood poisonous to the mosquitoes. Researchers have discovered that a drug named nitisinone can do just that. This is a medication. It's typically prescribed for rare diseases. But according to the new study, it can make human blood deadly for mosquitoes. Here's how it will work. Scientists will lace human blood with low doses of the drug. This is not harmful for humans, but it will turn the blood so toxic that mosquitoes will die within hours of feeding on it. What's more, the drug remains effective for about 16 days after the initial dosing. Now, this drug does not protect against diseases itself, but it works by killing the mosquitoes before they lay eggs, which can reduce the diseases spread by mosquitoes, breaking the chain of infection. Scientists say that this study is still in its nascent stage, and even if it's deployed safely, it cannot eradicate malaria or other such diseases alone. But it can definitely act as a tool to fight the tiny parasites sucking your blood.
And now it's time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. In the US, record rainfall floods Texas streets. In Australia, two adorable monkeys have a long-awaited family reunion. In Alaska, two NASA rockets light up the night sky. And finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1930, Istanbul officially received its present name. This is the largest city in Turkey. It was previously called Constantinople. But it was renamed Istanbul in an attempt to move away from Turkey's Ottoman past. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. Have a good weekend.
welcome to the late night edition with me, Ayushman Singh Jambal. Big breaking news coming in at the top of the bulletin. Now, after two back-to-back earthquakes that have caused unprecedented damage in Myanmar and Thailand, the regime in Myanmar